This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
I wanted to have an exploding robot on the front of the package, and that was deemed too violent. One guy said to the other guy, "See, I told you not to pay him." I'm thinking, oh my God, what am I dealing with here?
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Alison Woods was a graphic designer at Atari from 1982 to 1984. She designed the packaging for the computer versions of Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., Pole Position, Robotron, Food Fight, and other products. Later, she was vice president and creative director at Kidsoft, a CD-ROM-based software magazine for kids. This interview took place on May 26, 2016.
Well, I had a degree in graphic design from the California College of Arts and Crafts, and after I graduated, I moved to New York City, and I worked in New York for a couple of years, and I got a call from one of my colleagues who said, it seems like, the computer is really happening in California, and at the time, we were doing graphics the conventional way. We didn't use computers at all. And she said, I think the future is in California and that eventually everything is going to be done on the computer. So I moved back to California, and I got hired by Atari as a graphic designer. And I was hired by John Haig, who was the head of creative services for Atari, for the home computer division. And my job was, there was a creative team there that consisted of writers and designers. And we would get paired up to work on projects together. And we did primarily the packaging for the home computer division. So all the games that would run on, I think it was the Atari 1200 XL. Mm-hmm. That was the group that I worked for at Atari.
Nice.
Is that good?
That's good. So tell me, how'd you get hired? I mean, did you just apply through normal channels, or did you?
I think I had an interview at a design firm called Johnson, Peterson, Heinrichs, and Shakery in San Francisco, and the person who interviewed me said that he knew that there was an opening at Atari, and he encouraged me to apply, and he gave me the name of John Haig. So I called John Haig, and he scheduled an interview. And since John Haig had also worked in New York, he was, the fact that I had worked in New York as a graphic designer was something that he thought was valuable. And so that was one of the things that led him to hiring me. Also, I had worked for a design firm in New York that had specialized in package design, so I already had package design experience, which he also felt was valuable.
Sure. So when you got there, what did they put you to work doing?
When I got there, they teamed me up with a writer, and I designed the game packaging for Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., and those were the sort of the precursors for Mario Brothers. They were licensed from Nintendo. So at the time, Nintendo didn't have any game machines, so they were licensing their games to Atari, except the license just meant that Atari could sell the game, but they didn't give them any of the code. So Atari had their own team of programmers who would recreate the game for the Atari systems. So usually when I worked on Donkey Kong, they sent me over to hang out with the programmer, and he showed me, what he was doing with the game, so I could see a beta version of the game to figure out how to design the packaging to go with it.
Mm-hmm. So were you familiar with video games? Were you aware of Donkey Kong before this?
No, I was, I had played Pong and Space Invaders in, when they were arcade games, when you might encounter them in a bar, for example. So I was familiar with, those really, really rudimentary early video games. And then we'd be teamed up with a writer, so then the writer would come up, you'd work together to come up with an idea for what was going to go on the back of the package.
Nice.
So it's kind of more like an agency setup at Atari.
But within the corporation itself.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the box that I think you designed. It's the silver box with the white horizontal stripes, and there's a great image of Donkey Kong holding the girl in one hand and throwing barrels in the other. So how much direction were you given? I assume there was the template of using the silver boxes at that point, and so did you draw the art? Tell me everything you can remember about making the box.
Okay. So the silver template was designed by Johnson, Peterson, Heinrichs, and Shakery in San Francisco. So they designed the overall look and feel for the home computer packaging. And then the internal design group just designed each specific game. So in this case, I was given full reign to do whatever I wanted. But all of the illustrations that you see on the video packaging was always farmed out to an outside illustrator. So in this case, I hired New York illustrator Lou Brooks, and I worked with him. I told him what I wanted, and then he would send me sketches of what he thought would work based on what I told him I wanted, and then it would get approved we had to answer to a marketing director, so there was always a marketing director who was in charge of any given product, so that it had to go through them. So I was given full reign to do what I wanted, but then the marketing director had to approve what was presented, and I picked Lou Brooks because I really liked his cartoon style, which I thought would be really, really appropriate for this particular game. And I think he did a really great job on it. I think the look and feel that was created on this early Donkey Kong ended up being picked up by Nintendo later when they started developing the Mario Brothers line, and they ended up using him after he did this work for Atari. And I think he's living in California now. I think he's retired, but
nice.
Yeah, he was a really good illustrator.
If I know you also did the box for Donkey Kong Jr., but if I had to guess, I would say that was a completely different artist who did that design.
No, it's the same artist.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Same artist.
Nice. Just has it's not that different, but it seems it's beautiful too. But cool. All right, so you did Donkey Kong, and then what was next? I know you did Donkey Kong Jr., Pole Position, and other things. So what other things? And
I did one called Robotron, and that one was problematic because I wanted to have an exploding robot on the front of the package, and that was deemed too violent. And so we had to go back to ground zero on that one. And I don't remember how that one ended up, but it didn't have exploding robots on the front, I can tell you that. And I don't know if that one ever saw the light of day.
It did. I'm looking at a picture of the box now. There's kind of this isn't a great picture I'm looking at. It's kind of a fragmented space scene with there's a crosshairs shooting something that's exploding. I wouldn't say it's a robot that's exploding, but there's certainly an explosion going on.
Yeah.
I would say it's a pretty violent image, actually.
Well, that was the tame version. The original one was just, a big explosion on the front of the package. So, And then I did something called Food Fight, and I don't know if that one ever made it out either.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think. I did a line of educational software for them that were, was the first educational software. I did that line, and that ended up being white boxes with blue pinstripes to kind of look like note paper.
Oh, okay, right. So do you remember
those
which
were all
products?
collages.
Do you remember which products?
It was called Atari Learning Division, I think is what they called it. And there were, I think there were like 30 I think there were maybe 30 products in that line. So they were all educational. I can't remember the specific titles, but they covered math and reading and languages and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Geography. I think one of them got a design award, one of those packages. But it was a template. I think it was a template of 5 different designs, and then they just had title changes because they didn't want to invest a lot of money in the educational packaging.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was done internally, so that was all done. I did those all as collage illustrations.
And you did Pole Position.
Yes. The Pole Position, kind of already had a look and feel from the arcade game, and so in that case, we just picked up the graphics from the arcade game and kept them pretty similar to what was already there.
Nice.
I also did another program. It's called Atari Logo. It was that early programming language for children.
Sure.
That used something called, I think they called it turtle graphics, where they have a little turtle that would move around on the screen. I'm trying to think if I designed anything. I think that was kind of, I think that's what I did. I think that's the...
Nice. So how long did it take to make a package? From someone, came to you on the first of the month and said, we need a new box for Pole Position. Was it a week, a month, or 3 months before you were done?
I'm thinking it was probably like 6 weeks, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it would start out with just sketches for ideas for, what the package was going to be like, and then you had to research illustrators and figure out who was going to illustrate it. Then you had to get approvals first from the creative director, and then also from the marketing director, who was the product marketing person. And then you had to get an illustrator, and the illustrator would have to send rough sketches, and then those would have to be approved, and then the illustrator would need time to create that illustration. So that might take another couple of weeks for the illustration. And then you had to work with a writer, and they had to write the copy for the back of the package. And then that had to be approved by the marketing person and the head of the writing group. So there was a lot of approval that had to go on. And then once everything was designed, then it was handed off to the production department. So the production department was a whole other department, and they would create, the final artwork for the package, and they would have to create screen art, screen art was really something you take for granted today because it's so easy to do a screen capture. But back then, they didn't really have the technology for doing screen capture. So we had this old machine, I think it was called a Via Video machine, and that was one of the first machines that was capable of making these screens for the backs of these packages and the back of the video games. And the person who discovered that was actually Russell Brown, who now works for Adobe, and he's been at Adobe, I think, forever. And he sort of discovered that we had this machine back somewhere doing basically nothing, and he he figured out that it could be used for reproducing these screen captures for the packaging.
Nice. Did you do any boxes or art for any hardware, or were you strictly software?
I think we worked on some of the hardware packaging as a group. They had the whole creative services group working on the game packaging, and then I think it also got sent out so that we were competing against outside design firms to also try to come up with packaging for the game machines themselves. Mm-hmm. So I probably was part of the team that produced a lot of concepts, and I don't remember my concept particularly being picked up. There was also some packaging that was done in collaboration with Lucasfilm. There was like an Atari Lucasfilm collaboration. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I worked on that. There was a game called Rescue on Fractalus that Lucasfilm produced. And so there was a logo that was created. It was like a rising star logo that was the logo for Atari Lucasfilm. And also there was a concept for a logo that was developed for that project that looks an awful lot like the Industrial Light and Magic logo that had sort of this circle with a shadow underneath it. And I think that might have been one of the reject logos for the Atari Lucasfilm joint venture.
So in your email to me, I'm going to quote your email you sent me a couple weeks ago. You said, "I was there for the transitions from the spendthrift gay party boy Ray Kassar to Philip Morris's clueless James Morgan, and finally the terminal transition to the criminal clan under Jack Tramiel." Between the three of them. Oh, God,
yes. I'd probably get lawsuits if I told you about the Tramiels.
I know. I need stories here. You're protected under nothing, but really, it seems like you super have opinions about all these CEOs. So I'm just interested to hear, since you were there for three.
Well, I know that I remember looking. So Warner owned Atari. So Warner bought Atari from Nolan Bushnell, and so Ray Kassar came in, and I know one thing that practically bankrupted Atari was E.T. Phone Home.
Right.
So that game was one that they put a lot of money into, and they were convinced that was going to be the big hit. Well, it turned out to be this incredible dud of a game, and so they made they'd spent a fortune marketing this thing and building it from scratch and distributing it, and that wiped out all of Atari's profits. For the previous 3 years, and that was under Warner. So that was a disaster. And then Ray Kassar didn't really appreciate the work that the programmers did and the game developers did. And the game programmers wanted to get credit on the boxes, so that if they designed something like E.T. Phone Home, for example, they wanted a credit. And Ray Kassar thought that the programmers were replaceable and a bunch of prima donnas, and so a whole bunch of them left and started, Electronic Arts and
Activision, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all of this. So those were all disgruntled Atari programmers that were treated poorly by Ray Kassar. I think he described them as dish towel designers or something really, really insulting like that. So then, Ray Kassar was a lavish spender. That was his reputation. And then the guy came in from Philip Morris, and he was sort of like the person that was just handed a big mess, and he was kind of clueless because he's coming from, why would you put in a CEO that had, whose business was cigarettes in a tech company? So that was a disaster. And then Warner sold Atari to the Tramiels. So the Tramiels are the ones who developed the Commodore 64.
Right. Yeah.
So they came in, and they laid everybody off. They just cleaned house, and they left a couple of people.
Did you leave at that point, or?
Yeah, I left at that point, but I had started a graphic.
Quit?
Well, they just, I had a contract, so I just didn't renew my contract. So I just thought, okay, this is a disaster. I'm out of here. So I started a design firm with my husband, and so then they contacted us and asked us if we wanted to design their packaging. And as I recall, they owed us a lot of money, and they weren't going to pay us. So we said, well, we'll do some more work with you if you pay us up to date. So they paid us up to date. And then we're in a meeting, and we said, sure, we'd be happy to do this packaging, but you need to pay us 1/3 up front. And one guy said to the other guy, see, I told you not to pay him. I'm thinking, oh, my God, what am I dealing with here? I mean, and they had these really heavy New Jersey accents. So
you must be talking about the Sons, the Tramiel kids.
Yeah. So then we there was this guy named Mel, who wasn't one of the Sons, was a chain smoker. I wish my husband used to be able to do a good imitation of his accent, but they were characters. So we said, well, okay, we can't do that for you, unless you pay us up front, but we're happy to refer you to another design firm. So we referred them to Landor Associates because we figured, well, Landor, they're big enough to deal with them. So Landor said, thank you, and we'll give you a finder's fee. And I said, great. So then Landor did their packaging, and they didn't get paid, and it took them a year to get paid. And so we were sort of glad that we dodged that bullet.
Yeah, that's a familiar story.
Yeah, I think that was their policy, was they just didn't pay people unless they sued them, so that way, kept their overhead down. And then I think they pretty much ground Atari into it just died with them. They just didn't, and really Warner kind of killed it. I think E.T. Phone Home is what really killed Atari.
Yeah, that was certainly a nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
We're just that kind of thinking where, let's make more of these games than consoles exist to play them on. And also, we're only going to spend 3 weeks programming the game, so it might not be the best work. Things like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of the best games that Atari made were licensed from Nintendo.
Right.
Or they came over from the arcade. So they were already sort of a proven success in the arcade. And I think Warner also was a little bit clueless, about how to manage Atari. They just sort of acquired it, and then they didn't really know how to keep it live. Because at one point, Atari was one of the most recognized brands in the world, and they just, they died.
I just got to say, I have a lot of Atari products in my collection, and those silver boxes are among my favorites. It's just such a beautifully designed, and I love the layout and the fonts you guys chose, and it's just well done.
Thank you. It's funny, this is the second call I've gotten about Atari in the last month. I just got a call from somebody that worked with me at Atari who I haven't heard from since I worked there, telling me that somebody's writing a book about Atari packaging, and they might be calling me for an interview. So that was...
Neat.
So I don't know why Atari is suddenly becoming popular now after all these years.
So after you left Atari, I just want to talk briefly about, I guess you went to Kidsoft there, and you were doing a software magazine for kids. Can you tell me about that?
Oh, my God. So that's one where I was approached by Rick Devine, and he was trying to figure out how to market and distribute children's software. And at the time, I was running a graphic design business that specialized in software package design. And so he had this idea for, this kind of cartoon strip that seemed kind of lame. And so I spent a long weekend with this writer that I used to write. Her name is Paula Polly, and the two of us were a creative team at Atari. She was a writer. She came from, an advertising background. So we were talking about this project, And I said, what if we did a children's software magazine? And so then we started brainstorming around what that might look like. And so we pitched it to him and created a prototype. And he took that prototype and used it to get venture capital to actually produce it. So then Paula and I produced this magazine with the staff that I had from Woods & Woods Design, which is my design firm. And then he offered me the position of vice president and creative director. And then I was also responsible for overseeing the CD-ROM that they created that went with the magazine that had a bunch of little games, and then it had a component where it had all of the software titles on it, and then you could unlock them. So you'd pay, to unlock the titles that you wanted. Mm-hmm. And that one, we went for several months on that, and then we had this guy who came in that wanted to do a TV show, and he ended up taking over. It was kind of like that, that TV show Silicon Valley, where you lose control of your creation. Well, that's kind of what happened in that magazine. So this person who wanted to do a TV show sort of convinced Rick Devine that he could manage everything, and so I ended up not being a part of it anymore. And under his direction, the whole venture went under in about 30 days. But I know the first 2 issues of the Kidsoft magazine sold out at the newsstand. And it was fun to produce. But and that was really fun for a while, and it was fun finding people to create. It was fun creating the stories, and we invented a lot of things you could do with, the software that was out there. So that if you got a kid's drawing program, we would then create a bunch of activities in the magazine that you could do with that software.
Nice. So what haven't I asked you about your time at Atari that I should have?
Well, I can tell you that it was the most fun job I ever had.
Yeah.
I really loved working with that creative team. I really loved. I still keep in contact with these people that I worked with at Atari. It was really a fun group to work with. Halloween was always interesting because the programmers came up with a lot of crazy costumes on Halloween, as you can well imagine, and it was just a really, really fun job. When Atari blew up because of the Tramiel acquisition, most of those people ended up going and working for all of the other startup software companies in the area. So a lot of them went to Broderbund, or they went to Adobe, or they went to Electronic Arts. And so as a result of that, the graphic design business I started with my husband, we ended up, having a really successful business just designing software packaging until I think 2002, 2003, when the tech bubble burst. So it was a really good ride.
Nice. And what do you do today?
I am a painter. I'm a fine artist.
Nice.
I do, and my work is derivative of. I work with the computer to create my art. I create paintings, but it's all derivative of computer algorithms. Mm-hmm. So it's still based on my, technology background.
Oh, nice. Is there a website I can point people to so they can see your current work?
Yes, it's www.Allison with one L, Alison Woods.com. And I have a show coming up in Brooklyn at Blam Project Space, and the opening is is June 3rd.
Nice. Well, this will not be published before then, but wow, have a great showing. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, I think I have what I need. Thank you very much, Allison.
Okay, you're welcome.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.